Where do I begin? Let's go ahead and start with the one-sentence review, something I've been asked close to 50 times over the last week. What's your review of this game in one sentence, Lore? And my answer is, wait a year. This game is... there's a lot of good core elements to it, I think. Some things that probably can't be fixed, but in about a year, we'll be past most of the major bugs. We're already past two of the game breakers that I ran into in my run. There will be probably more mod support. There will probably be more good mods that you can use to enhance your enjoyment, and there's the possibility of there being some DLCs and or expansions. Wait a year. Trust me. Now, if you can't wait a year, that's okay, and there's nothing wrong with that. I suppose you could say whether or not the game launched in an acceptable or unacceptable status, and honestly, that's kind of up to you to decide. That's a judgment call. I'm not here to lay judgment one way or the other on that one. I mean, I did in the review, but not here. You can think of that however you want to. But I do think that this game really needed the extra time it didn't get. Now, there's a lot I could say behind the scenes here. One of the things, usually when I do these ruminations, I like to do behind the scenes, gameplay, story, pretty much in that order. And I like to leave you with a few questions, and that's what we're going to do today. But I mention this because I'm not going to go super in-depth into the behind the scenes, because I kind of already have. I've been covering Cyberpunk and its development for literally years at this point, and it's come up as a regular topic, especially on Lore Week, but also just during regular streams and regular discussion. So I don't really have much else to add there except for one new thing. Why? Why is the game in this state as of now? I have a theory. A lore theory, and then I'm sued. Don't sue me, Matt Pat, please. I do have a theory here, and it's a theory based on speculation, so I don't actually know. I think there's three major contributing factors to why this game is in the manner that it currently is. Reason number one, money people. On the off chance you've never heard me use that phrase, allow me to elucidate. Money people is a phrase I came up with years ago to refer to the people who actually make decisions at companies and corporations. That's it. That's the definition. The ones who actually decide. Because managers may or may not. Developers may or may not. Project leaders may or may not. But the money people actually make the decisions for what happens at that company. Sometimes they're CFOs. Sometimes they're presidents. Sometimes they're board members. Sometimes they're majority shareholders. It varies from company to company, hence the need for the generic term. In this case, there's a pretty clear push by the money people to try and make sure that this game was released within a window. And that's a flaw. As I just mentioned, I really feel like this game could have used a little bit more development time. And by a little bit more, I mean, I honestly think this game should have come out next year. And I'm not joking about that. If this game came out next holidays, yeah. Now, that's probably on the outside. I'll go ahead and repeat something I mentioned on stream. There's an acceptability range of delaying a production. And you need to delay it a little bit in most cases because the projections are projections. They're guesstimates. And they're usually based more on financial quarter reports than they are about actual problems that you're going to run into when you're making the work. This is especially true in movies for anybody who follows the development and construction of movies. But this is true in general. Television run into this. Books run into this. I'm just going to think of a couple of book series that have that problem right here. And of course, games run into this all the time. So, the acceptable pushback range, even this isn't a hard rule. We talked about this extensively during the stream. You do need to push back, in my opinion, at least a little bit. But if you push back too far, you run into some additional issues. Not the least of which being the fact that you'll start to lose interest. I mean, if Half-Life 3 came out right now, it would be more of a joke than something that would be celebrated. Because we've pushed past that acceptability range. It is a precious rare game that hits that, it's taken too long to come out range and still actually manages to make a big splash. I can only think of two games like that off the top of my head. So the money people, I think, again, this is all speculation based on observation, were pushing for this release, which is what normally happens. But if you were catching that, I kind of referenced something else in there, and that would be management. Point number 2. Mismanagement, specifically. Now, this is nothing new. I have railed against and spit venom upon the CD Projekt management team for years now. I think they don't know how to manage things. And I want to be clear about how I stress that. Because we in the modern era have gotten really used to just blaming management. Because, they're just a bunch of suits, you know what I mean, who have no idea what they're doing and have no idea how to do it. But a good manager is critical, in my opinion. I'm not going to say necessary, but I'm going to say critical. You put 10 brilliant creative people in a box, and what you will get is a mess. I think you need someone, and I think it is critical that you have someone who can manage that, who can take their output and craft it together and say, you work on this and you work on this, you two coordinate on this thing. This is how we want this to go. Okay, I know you three disagree, so we're going to pick that particular path to go with. There needs to be management in the literal sense of the word. And I feel so stupid for emphasizing that, but when I bring that up in normal conversation, most people think, you're just blaming the managers. And I'm like, no. I'm blaming the management and lack thereof. I feel like there is a tremendous amount of, we'll figure it out. We'll work it out going on here. And I do think that is absolutely a problem when it comes to the development of this game, which, of course, leads me to the third big category. This is the one that's going to make people all hate me. So if you want to, get your torches and pitchforks, this would be the time. Because the third thing, I think, is the development team. Hear me out. This one I'll admit a little bit of personal bias on, because I've been there more than once in my life, and I know exactly what it feels like to be very ambitious and to want to do a big, awesome thing oh my God, it's taking so long. I'm never going to get, the FF9 theater's coming out someday, I swear, guys. And it's never going to come out. Oh God. I think that there was a little bit of, don't worry, we can get all this stuff done in time. Oh crap, we're running out of time. Don't worry, we've got this. Oh God, we don't got this. Oh God, we don't got this. That problem. I'm sure some of you at least personally sympathize with this, and I'm sure the rest of you have an understanding of what I'm talking about. I think that all three of these factors were all contributory towards this overall problem, and why this game was launched in the status that it is. Now, I'll go and give my opinion now. I think this is unacceptable. Financially, personally, and professionally, I think in all three axes, I think that this game should have been pushed back, and should have been given more time and more support. Frankly, even if you wanted to make a big splash financially, I guarantee you push this game back a year, maybe 6 months, I guarantee you with total certainty that this game would still sell exceptionally well then. And you're probably thinking, but they would have additional development time for those 6 months. You cannot tell me that it would take, that would be a net loss, is what I'm trying to say. They might not make as much money, but they would still make money. And anybody who knows anything about finances will tell you that long-term financial development is something that could be arguably more beneficial, especially for the general production and construction of long-term industry stake. We'll go with stakes there. Than just trying to make a bunch of money now and then cutting and running. Yes, I know how common the other thing is. Let's not get into that. Corporations suck. Cyberpunk. Moving on. This is a good time, though, to segue into gameplay, because I didn't like the gameplay of this game all that much. I mean, it wasn't bad. There's a good selection of guns, for example, and they've got some meaty sound effects to them. I will admit, once I stumbled across the Comrade, I basically just never used another gun after that point. But I found several I liked. The Masamune was one I was rather enjoying. The double-barrel shotgun was a nice gun. The new, I think, was another pistol that I rather enjoyed. You have a lot of variety and you have a lot of options, and they sound meaty and they look different, and you have a lot of customization options. Good stuff. This is, of course, primarily a shooter, so it makes sense that that would be something of a focus. There's some good kit with regards to how you can build yourself out, and just about any build is viable. If you go deep into any one of the trees, you will be overpowered by the end, and frankly, I think that's a good thing. I think that's a thing that should be acceptable and allowed. The difficulty options suck because they do nothing but change the amount of damage done and the amount of health done. Now, I don't want to go fully into this topic, but anybody who's seen me over the years knows that I'm pretty big on difficulty selections when it comes to game design. Now, difficulty selection is something that takes a lot of time and effort, so it's somewhat understandable that the triage they were doing would mean, no, let's just add a variable, more damage and more health, less damage and less health, depending on the difficulty, bam. It's one of the most bare bones easy things. I could probably code that. That's how incredibly easy of a thing that is to do. That's why I call it lazy difficulty. Also because I don't think it adds any experience, but that's neither here nor there. But you heard me mention the word triage. Let me jump into one other thing here for a moment. There's a lot of features that are missing from this game, and there's a lot of polish that's missing from this game. And that's why I wanted to bring up that triage thing. Because it feels like the developers, and I do want to give them credit on this, sat down and said, we don't got this. And cut things. They cut ideas, they cut concepts. They could have spent extra time and work making the NPCs actual NPCs. Instead, they're basically two-mode bots. They walk around the city doing whatever, or they crouch because they've been activated into danger mode. That's it. So they could have done something to flesh those out, or they could have left them the two-mode bots and focused their time and effort elsewhere. This is why I brought up that management thing. Believe it or not, I'm not a fan of, giving the developers infinite time to work on something, because maybe this is just the manager in me speaking, or maybe this is just a little bit of observation as well. But if you just let the people make, well, that's how development hell happens, isn't it? There are actually this happens more in movies than it does in games, but there are several games and several movies that are still in development and have been for years because no one ever stepped in and said, terminus point, right? You need to release at some point. I hope at least some of you creative types out there actually understand what I mean by that. I don't really mean this as an insult. It's just we need to be reined in every now and again, right? To misquote CGP Grey, if you have a moment where you have to finalize a project and release it, then it will be done. Otherwise, you're still working on that very first project and constantly going back and nitpicking and changing and adjusting and fixing. And maybe if I do this, and let's try the red version. So it makes sense that they triage. There's a lot of things that are cut from here. Only a few of them really bother me. And only one of them really bothers me. Like I said, the game breakers were patched out during my playthrough. I did run into a cavalcade, a mountain of bugs. Non-stop barrage. I want to make this clear. This is above and beyond anything I've ever seen in an Elder Scrolls game. Not hyperbole. Okay? I want to make that very clear. And you know how buggy those games can be. This was just, wow. Objects floating in the air and impermanence with regards to loot and people animating the wrong way and glitching hair vanishing. And God, I can't possibly list them all. Someone actually asked me, what's some bugs you encountered? I'm just like, well, let me tell you the last few that just happened because those are the freshest on my mind because it is just nonstop. Now, is that a bad thing? Yes. Is that an unacceptably bad thing? That's debatable. Does it pull me out of the game? Yeah. That's ultimately why I ended up giving a negative for that. I was thinking about that for quite a while because most of the bugs are just funny, right? But the problem is that this is just my opinion, but that kind of literal just someone got a fire hose of bugs and was just spraying it at my face, and it removes me from the game. I am at all times aware of the fact that I'm playing a game. There's no immersion whatsoever, and so it's very hard for me to get invested. It's also worth noting that the points where the game shines were often ruined, or at the very least, I shouldn't say ruined, they were detracted from by the presence of said bugs, making them worse by existence. So that's a thing too. But let me ask you something weird. Let me ask you something, because this is going to be a weird one. Which do you like more, Fallout 3 or Fallout New Vegas? Now, this is entirely anecdotal from myself and my friends' experience. But Fallout 3, in our experience, is a substantially less buggy game than Fallout New Vegas. And yet the overwhelming majority of people I know prefer Fallout New Vegas. I only point this out because this is why I kept talking about the core stuff earlier. A buggy game can be endured if it has good core concepts. So, does this game have good core concepts? Yes, I think the stealth is actually well designed. I think the modification system and the shooting are well done. I think there's some legitimately good stuff under here. However, there are four? Hang on, I'm looking at my notes here. I actually have two things of notes. I got digital notes and I got physical notes to be on brand here. There are several things I think that are not going to be patchable out and may not even be moddable out. Thing number one, the interface. How many of you pull up the map and then as you're trying to leave the map suddenly like tilts, or actually it's like this, and then it tilts like this. How many of you know exactly what I'm talking about there? How many of you try to holster your gun and then end up pulling out a second gun, and then you have to holster that one? How many of you have a thing where you're trying to get to a certain menu, and so you exit out and then go through 3 menus in a row and then slowly scroll down to find the thing you're looking for? These are just a couple of examples that come to mind immediately. As with the bugs problem, I think the interface is actively bad, and I don't think there's a patch that's going to fix that. Some of this can be fixed by key bindings, but not all, because the very design of the interface has issues, and the way in which I interact with the game is frustrating. There's also the save problem. This could be patched. There's a moment in this game where I had a dialogue option, and there was a ticking clock, so there was this ticking clown, and I hit save in the middle of this, and then selected my option. Later I was able to reload, and with the same ticking clock was able to pick another option to see the other branch. This is why I say this is probably patchable, because that shows that the code supports what is effectively quick save, Fallout 4 style. However, there are 2 types of categories that you cannot save during. One is during any type of specific story, cutscene, mission, whatever, which, near as I can tell, is completely arbitrary on when they prevent you from saving and when they don't. It's like a manual blanket put over you so that you cannot save in this state. The other is in combat. Both of these aggravated the hell out of me frequently because of the fact that it meant that I would have to redo extensive cutscenes thanks to the Tor syndrome we were having later, which is where you pick a dialogue option, it's not clear what it actually is. Or you'd be going through an extensive sequence, which is actually legitimately hard, and there's one guy you haven't been able to kill, and thanks to how the AI works, well, he's just standing there waiting for you to find him, or leash when you get a very far away from him distance. And you can't save that whole part. In fact, it will actually overwrite autosaves, and you can skip over autosaves as a consequence of that problem. And, well, this is irritating, to put it bluntly. There's also no quick load, even though, near as I can tell, there's no reason not to. Now, it's not a big deal to hit escape and then hit load and then hit load. But why is there no quick load? There's a quick save. This is a good time to mention that there's some visibility issues. When you stealth, there's a filter that goes over the edge of the screen. Why? That could be patched out or modded out pretty easily. But in certain circumstances, especially when it's pretty dark, like when you're sneaking into the Arasaka places with Takamoto, it's a little hard to see what you're doing. Similarly, the scan filter also has several issues with how it's presented, and there's also issues with, and I have no evidence of this, but it feels like sometimes the mouse cursor doesn't know what you're selecting. So you're like, there's 3 guys in a row, so you're trying to select the first guy and it selects the third guy. So you mouse off and then try to select the first guy and it selects the second guy. This is something, and of course it's hard to see in many cases with the filter mode for the reasons I just mentioned. Then we talk about the AI. Now I already mentioned this. The AI is bad, to be as blunt as I possibly can. If you are in their immediate vicinity, they will advance on you and they will attack you very aggressively on any difficulty, by the way. I did some tests on this. If you are not in their immediate vicinity, they stand there and wait till they're activated by you getting close enough to them. They still aggro to you. They know where you are. They're just going to stand there forever. All of this, there's also the explosion damage while we're on the subject. All right, sorry, let me jump into that one really quick, because the explosion damage is silly, in my opinion. Explosions can straight up kill you, even if you have the perks and mods on your gear in order to reduce explosion damage. From full health, just, you're dead. And that happened to me more often than I'd like to admit to. You can argue whether that's valid or not. I think that if you specifically go out of a way to have the explosion resistance, that you should probably be able to resist explosions. I don't know, I'm just a weirdo here. And I'm too stupid to really properly explain why this bothers me, but there's systems in the game to allow you to resist damage, but not explosive damage, at least not in a way that matters. And yet explosive damage is a semi-regular problem, not only with mines, but with things that explode, which, can cause problems, obviously. But all of this pales compared to what is actually the biggest complaint for me. Let me tell you a story. So I'm doing a mission. I'm going after one of the cyber psychos, and I'm going up this con tower. And I get to the top, get this thing, loot. I start walking down the con tower, and then I die. And I'm like, and everyone streams like, yeah, no, you were low in health. And I'm like, no, I'm not. I actually went back and watched the VOD just to 100% verify for this. What had happened is I slipped down one of the steps and took collision damage and died. How many of you have had something similar happen? One time I hopped off of a short ledge, hit a trash pile, which flung me into the ground so hard that I died. When I reloaded and did the exact same jump, it simply slid me across the room. One time I hopped off of a very short hop of like an outcropping of rock out in the Nomad Wastes and and then slid and died instantly. I kept saying physics during the run. The way that they render and use physics is terrible. It's actually bad. And the way that they do the collision damage thing is part of the reason why that is. I've had several times where I was doing a non-lethal playthrough. I killed 24 people during my playthrough. I was keeping track of all the people I was deliberately killing. It's all the real scum suckers, basically. And so, I'd non-lethal someone, and then they'd slide on nothing, and the physics of them sliding would kill them. Or how about sometime when you're looking down at a case of beer bottles, and they're all just bouncing off of each other so hard, and one of them goes flying? How many times have you been running on the waste and you've seen a car just go flying into the air because it accidentally slipped on a slope slightly too hard for it? The physics have issues, and unlike the somewhat funny bugs, this bug actually is irritating, especially if you're in the middle of combat and haven't been able to save for a while because the AI is standing too far from you. So you just have to redo the last 5 minutes of your life because you slipped on a staircase. If you're paying attention, a lot of these issues fold over each other. They are made worse by virtue of the other issues that also exist. Problematic. I'm not sure that one's patchable, the physics bug. The only thing I can think of is if they basically turned off collision damage, and I'm not sure what that would do to the rest of the game. I don't know. I can only speculate. Now, I've been talking a lot of negative here, and I do apologize. I already mentioned some positives gameplay-wise. Let me look at my other notes. Yes, I have a third thing of notes here. Brain dance. That's a big one. The brain dances are actually, in my opinion, awesome. They're detective missions, right? They're detective scanning things. We've seen this in The Witcher 3. We've seen this in the Batman Arkham games, for example. This is not a new concept, but it's a slightly new take on an old concept. It's an iteration of the idea. And I like them. I like having the camera. I like going through the once through. I like being able to scan for the 3 different things. I like being able to rewind and restart and all over. It's good stuff. It's a good storytelling tool. And it's actually something that I enjoyed quite a bit. I'd say it's probably the most innovative thing the game adds, even though it's not literally innovative. Most interesting gameplay thing that this game adds? Driving was interesting. Because I've heard a lot of people say driving's terrible in this game. I don't actually agree. The problem is your stats on each car matter so much that if you have a car with bad handling or bad turning or bad brakes, then, But if you have a car that has good all of those things, well, then it's just driving. It's not what I would call good driving, I want to be clear. But it is still driving that, is passable, is acceptable. I can't remember the name of it. It's the Maitama or something like that. There's little Japanese cars, this dinky little thing. It's this red thing. We called it Judy. Lore Reloaded donated to call it Judy. And that was basically my main car the whole game. And you might be like, But other than having a low acceleration, that car was brilliant. It handled well. It turned great. And it was basically a tank. If I ran into another car, that other car would go ramping right off of me and flying off. And I would just keep going as if nothing happened. It was also small, which meant it could fit into places other cars couldn't. I also tried out the Meredith. That's what we called our Erendite. That car was crap. Oh, and by the way, first-person mode in driving, not so great. How many of you like not being able to see the road while you're driving? This is a lot of complaints, and there's a lot of issues here. I wish we had more cosmetic stuff. I wish the mission design was a little bit more interesting. There's not a lot of missions that really jumped out at me. There are a few good ones. There's a site here. I'm just pulling up all kinds of notes for this run. Here it is. It's on our Cyberpunk, the game. It's a Reddit thread. Mega list of every feature this sub wants to be added to the game. It's a good thing to glance down. Obviously, there's a lot of things they request here, and this is basically a laundry list of, it would be nice if, and none of this is going to get added. There are some spoilers there, by the way, for anybody who hasn't played this game, so FYI. But yeah, I'm completely with a lot of these things. Just look at this like, that'd be nice. Be nice to have street cred actually matter. It'd be nice to have visible cyberware. It'd be nice to have monowire hacking. It'd be nice to have a craft all button. There's another interface problem. All this is stuff that I've already mentioned in part or in full, either today or on the stream. But I just mentioned it if anybody wants to glance down that list and see what you think of it. Now, you've heard me complain a lot. So why is it that I gave this game 40 pluses to story? Well, before I talk about that, let me talk about quest flow. Because one of the things that this game does weirdly well from a core design perspective is quest flow. You get a quest, and then there's another quest over there, and then you do another quest over here. And as you're going, you're probably getting phone calls and messages. Those lead to other quests. There's basically no dull moment. This was like a 90-hour game, and as I've said many times, the length of a game does not matter. Not really. It is how well it utilizes that length. This is one of the reasons why in our spreadsheet that is visible to the public, we now have a thing where we track pluses per hour in order to show how worth it, how dense those particular hours were filled with content. Because there was no real padding in this game for me. No grinding, no slogging, no just running the treadmill, no point. I never got bored. Not once. For all the complaints I had, for all those irritations, I never actually got bored. And I always had something to do to the point of almost ludicrousness. But nevertheless, I was with it the whole time. And that is something impressive. Let me use my final parallel before I really shift into the story here. I like to take walks. I don't get to do it anymore because I don't have time. You know, I don't have time in the morning because I barely have time for breakfast most days, and then I only get an hour time to do all the in-between stuff for lunch. And then I get about an hour and a half in the evenings to do stuff. So I don't have time for walks. It's not a complaint, it's just a statement of fact. But I'm sure some of you understand. You know, just going out, nice park, nice day, you know, sun's out. Maybe it's raining if you're into that. Maybe it's snow if you're into that. I'm sure at least some of you understand this. And I'm sure some of you are also thinking, oh, he's giving the walk analogy again, because I've used this one before. A really nice walk can be enjoyable just by itself. And you're really into it. Maybe there's some great flowers out, or maybe it's just perfect weather. Maybe you have a good friend you're with. And you've got a rock in your shoe. You know, it's not a big rock. Other than the physics bug, which I mentioned earlier, and the inability to save in combat and in cutscenes feature, there's no really big stuff there. I mean, I suppose I could mention a few other things, but those are the two really big ones. Everything else is frankly a minor complaint, and I wouldn't be surprised if there are comments down below, or people who right now as they're watching this are thinking, Lord, these are all little complaints, and you're absolutely right. This is a 90-hour game. The reason I am re-emphasizing that point is because that's the whole point of the rock and the shoe analogy. It's a little issue, and we know that. But as you're going along, it just irritates you more. At first you're like, well, whatever. And then it's like, ugh. And it's like, ugh. And after a while, it's all you can focus on is the fact that this is just driving you batty. What is initially a small issue becomes worse over time. This is how using time can matter when it comes to game length. Because all these little issues were basically non-stop, and I had what was effectively a non-stop cavalcade of irritation as I was playing this very long game on this excellent walk. 40 plus as a story, or whatever the final tally is. I don't have it in front of me. Right? I hope at least some of you understand that, because now I'm going to talk about the things I didn't like about the story, which is a relatively small thing. The first thing I didn't like about the story was the quest flow. What? It suffers the same problem most open world games do that focus on arcs. You can do the quests in whatever order, and that can negatively affect certain things where characters, in some cases, literally act out of character because the character arcs they've already been through, they haven't been through yet. Stuff like that. There's a few other things I could talk about, you know, the world design. I could talk about the animations. Let's talk about the animations. Sometimes the animations are brilliant. I wrote down a couple of specific things. There's the bit where Jackie's knee is bouncing. I don't know if you can see the camera jiggling a little bit there. When he's nervous, getting the briefing from Dex. There's this bit where Evelyn kind of nods in reaction to something you say when you say it, so you can kind of, it feels more natural of a conversation. There's little things like that. My personal favorite, though, is when you're getting ready for the, by the way, we're officially in spoilers territory, when you're getting ready for the parade heist, or the parade hit, and V reaches up and there's this holographic petal that falls down, and she catches it, and it falls through her hand because it's holographic, and there's this moment where she just clenches, just barely, and then just kind of goes limp and lowers. And there's so much emotion that's expressed in that tiny little animation. When the animation's good, it's great. The rest of the time, it's basically a PS2 game. Now, what does this have to do with the story? Well, that's the story in a nutshell. When this story shines, oh, it shines. When this game as a whole shines. It shines. This is also why I talked so much about that triage thing earlier. I get the very strong feeling that they sat down and said, let's focus on that and that and that. And by God, they did. And in my opinion, you can tell where they focused their time, effort, resources, and personnel in this game. The good of this game absolutely crushes the bad. For all the time I've just spent complaining, allow me to say very clearly that I enjoyed this game very much. I will probably never replay it without cheats unless we're doing a review of future expansions or DLC, but the fact of the matter is, this game has so much good going for it. Where to begin now? Now I'm stuck again, because now I gotta talk about the story. The intro. What's the first thing it establishes? We see, we hear about, there's a lottery for how many people are registered deaths. So that's a nice little opening thing there. When you do the Corpo intro, there's this bit where this guy kills several people in the European Space Council, just like that. He's not even a high-level person in Arasaka. He's just a guy at Arasaka. And that's the kind of thing he can just do, basically without consequence. There's no real problem for doing that. The intros, all three of the intros do a lot to establish very quickly and very efficiently. I would say Corpo is my favorite, followed by Nomad, followed by Street, for reference. But all three of them are good. And all three of them are mutually exclusive. This is, if you're noticing, we're still kind of in the negative territory. I feel like the Origins probably shouldn't have even been a thing. Or if they were, I know that sounds strange. What I think is maybe you should smash them together. Because we don't play a Corpo and we don't play a Nomad. We play a Street. We're a street punk solo. That is this game, and that's the nature and design of the game. And that's fine. But it would be interesting to see if they could do something else with that. Either to try and branch it out, maybe have actual party members who can do other types of tasks for you, or maybe have a full scripting sequence, kind of like Final Fantasy XII with gambits. So you can you can have a netrunner for you who's doing all the actual quick hacking in order to handle all that stuff for you, so you don't have to think about it, shutting off cameras or turning them friendly or marking enemies or blinding them or whatever. There's a lot of potential there, I think, but that would take a lot of time and effort and triage. So instead, we're a solo. Here's my thought, and feel free to tell me I'm an idiot. Mash all three intros into one. Make it one intro. We'd have to do some rewriting and restructuring. Probably Nomad, Street, Corpo in that order. Nomad is you reaching the town. During Street, you're reaching the town, reaching the city. During Street, we meet Jackie for the first time. It's like, hey, Jackie, what's up? And he basically, we have the incident with the cops, and he's like, hey, let's be cool. And that's how we meet Jackie. And then we fast forward a little bit, maybe see a few missions, or maybe just not add anything, because again, we're trying not to add too much to the game. And then we cut to the Corpo scenes, and where it's working there, and Jackie's got our back, but it's okay because Jackie saves our life, and then we're set free, and then we have the montage. You could see how it would kind of work. And I think that would be an interesting take on it. It would especially give us all three potential past dialogue options if we wanted to. That being said, what I just stated is my favorite part of the Origins, the dialogue options, because, well, I played a Corpo, talker, and pretty much all the Corp options were good. Like, they were great, and the way that I was able to play V as a consequence of that was also great. This is a good time to mention that V's voice actors are amazo great, I think is what I'm going to call them. Now, I listened to the male voice actor a bit, especially since there was a bug at one point where my character, who was female, suddenly swapped to using the male voice actor. But the female voice actress is one of the best voice acting I've heard in recent memory. It's right up there with the rock star level of quality. This is good stuff. She nails tone and nuance and depth and emotion and just, absolute praise. Tons and tons of praise for her voice acting. And I suppose the way we play V is interesting too. There's not a lot of choices really. You can basically be a punk or you can be street. And you can kind of play both. But you can also play someone who is a good person. Someone who is trying to help people and trying to aid and make the city a better place. And I feel like the game kind of wants you to. You don't have to. You can be a dick, this game. But I feel like the game kind of wants you to play that way. And that's certainly how I played. It was very fun. Anyone want to share any stories of playing, a unpleasant V, please feel free to share. The game establishes a lot. Let me share another anecdote. I've obviously played the P&P of Cyberpunk several times. 2020, most specifically. I never actually got a chance to play Red. And I've played several campaigns in it, both running and playing in. It's a fun setting. I actually really like running it, and I really like playing in it. Usually heist stuff, because that's how that works. But whenever I closed my eyes and pictured Night City, what they present here in this game is basically what I pictured. And going forward, if I ever picture this kind of thing before, this is what I'm going to picture. The design of the city is phenomenal. For all the complaints I mentioned earlier, they melt in the face of how much of a treat it is to just drive around and look around. There's so much to take in. So much flavor and presentation and color. And just, it oozes out of every corner. I feel like the city itself is probably one of the best designed aspects of the entire game. They also cover several concepts very well. The intro establishes a few things very quickly and efficiently. We find out what Trauma Team is and how they function. We find out what MadPax is and what they do. Or MadTax. MacTax? MaxTac? Oh god, I can never remember the acronym. The guys who kill cyber psychos. Those guys. The super police. We find out about Ripper Docs. We find out about Circles of Trust. This is one I talked about a bit. In a setting like this, you have to establish people you really trust. And then there's like rings coming out from that, degrees of trust. And in the beginning and the middle, we have two people very solidly in that ring. Victor, Jackie. Now, Victor, I unfortunately don't have much to say about, even though he's awesome and amazing and wonderful. And for those of you curious, the very first thing I did after, getting my first few upgrades from Victor to start off the missions for Dex was I ran around doing missions until I had the 21 grand to pay him off, because of course I freaking did. I got your back, bro. Victor's awesome. And he's a Ripper Doc we can trust. Invaluable in a setting like this. Having a Ripper Doc you can trust, having a Fixer who you can trust, and having a Netrunner who you can trust are all pretty much invaluable things in this setting. Interestingly enough, we have all three throughout the course of this game. At certain points, they're out. But Jackie, I'm going to go ahead and admit something. I gave 3 separate positives to Jackie for this game, and I stand by that firmly. Jackie's, he's amazing. He's so naive, and yet he's not. And he's intelligent, and he's nuanced. He's one of the most 3-dimensional characters in the whole game, and it's funny because spoilers. He's just there for Act 1. What do you say about an amazing person like that? He deserved better. One of the things I find most interesting about Cyberpunk 2077 is that they present a truly horrifically bad setting. There's some really horrible dreck in this setting. And then they give us dozens upon dozens of really good people in it that you just want to reach out and hug and take care of, and they're cool, right? They're legit. It's weird. It was not what I was expecting walking into this, if I'm honest. There are a few terrible people, but for the most part, it's like, yeah, Jackie deserves better than a place like this. And for those of you who haven't done it, I highly recommend you make regular calls in story beats to Jackie's cell after he dies. Because there's conversations you can have there, and they are amazing. But I think the thing that really strikes me most about Jackie is not just the loyalty and the fact that he's got us and the fact that he's a nice guy and the fact that he's uncertain about certain things and that he wants to, do more exercise, and he's got his books, which he reads, and there's this issue. And the fact that he keeps that leather belt, that's what I put on his grave, by the way. The sign, that sign of not just rebellion and defiance, but I keep this because if you come back, I'm ready for you. If I can share a story very briefly. In World of Warcraft, let me give you the super summary version. There's a group of people called the Pandarans who used to be enslaved by a group of people called the Mogu, okay? The Mogu built giant statues of themselves. The Mogu were overthrown. The Pandaran left the giant statues. Why? Because they changed what it was. It used to be a symbol of oppression. Now is it a symbol of freedom? You will never enslave us again. And that's what that leather belt was for Jackie. You will never hurt me or my mother again. And he never did, funnily enough. There's all sorts of little details to Jackie like that, and he's totally going to the extant. The biggest piece of praise I could give to Jackie in this game is that as recently as today, the day I am recording this, which is day 9, I think. No, this is day 10. Sorry, day 10 of playtime at this point. I think. I don't have my notes in front of me. It's been a while. there was a bit where we saw a thing which referenced Jackie, and it still hurts. It's still just like, oh, Jackie. And I don't know what else to add to that. Dex. So, let's rewind just a second here. One of the things that they do well is they use the camera well. Now, I want to explain what I mean by that. My favorite example of this prior to this game is actually Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2. Modern Warfare 2 they frame it. There's moments where they specifically make it so that you are likely to look in a direction or likely to come out of an area looking in a direction. Now, this is about terrain design. So like, let's say you're coming out of a building and you walk and your objective is down here. So you walk down here, and what they can do is they can design this building to have a roof up to here and this fence to be up to this point so that there's kind of a opening out into the city moment. And if there's a person over here to your right, then you are inclined to look the camera to the right. So they have effectively framed the camera. So you're going to be probably looking the camera this way. You don't have to. You can point the camera wherever. But they do this constantly throughout the game. They have these framing moments where they encourage you or incline you to look in a direction. And you can tell a lot of effort and design was made into doing that. This is one of the reasons I praised the city so much earlier, is they'll do that and it's like, oh, this is such a good shot. And then you hit photo mode. So we run into Dex, right? And Dex is an idiot. Actually, let me rewind just a second. The game makes what I would consider to be, under normal circumstances, a mistake, but it works very well because of how it's presented. Presentation is so much when it comes to fiction. We encounter Saburo, the Emperor himself. I know he's not literally an emperor, but... So we encounter the Emperor himself and Adam Smasher very early on, and Yorinobu. And we go up there to steal the relic, and we see Saburo's death. And then we barely escape, and then we don't escape, and then Jackie dies. Everything about every scene I just mentioned is brilliantly crafted. I gushed about it on camera, and if you want the full details, you can go watch the stream, because this is the whole point of the Rumination, is to be a summary of said stream. But I can only give nothing but praise for how they did this. The tension was like... I actually can't remember the last game off the top of my head. I felt so tense as we're sitting there, freezing, as Takamoto is scanning for us. And Adam Smasher totally sees us, by the way. And we're just absolutely paralyzed as the Emperor is there talking to his son. And then his son kills him. Remember how I mentioned how the animations are great when they're manually crafted? Here's another one. Yorinobu, when he kills his father, is freaking out. And he's doing it in such a wonderful manner. It's all visual. It's all visual. It's all in the animation. It's all in the way he's... and then... Okay, and so he... And it takes him like 30 solid seconds to compose himself after killing his dad, right? Holy crap. Brilliant stuff. And then, of course, we're caught on the way out. I mentioned it on stream that, honestly, given the circumstances, this is probably the moment I would have just jumped out the window, because we're screwed. And then they initiate security lockdown, so we can't. Oh, crap. Then we barely make our way out. That was fun to stealth through, by the way. I mentioned before, I love stealth gameplay. I know that sounds strange, but anybody who's watched me extensively knows that I dig it. It's one of my jams when it comes to gameplay design. I love doing full stealth playthroughs and ghost playthroughs in like Deus Ex, Thief, Dishonored, even Metal Gear Solid, which isn't quite the same thing, but it's fun to me. And it was fun in this game, other than when it was irritating, like I would accidentally actually jump out of stealth because I was adjusting my position. And I hit left twice, too close to each other, so I ended up dashing out of combat, and yeah, a lot of reloads. Anyways, we're not complaining here, we're moving on. This is also how they introduced Delamane. I love Delamane. Delamane's awesome. And he's just... It's funny, as I figured at first he would just be another, random corporate thing. But no, Delamane's actually pretty cool. And he kind of had our back more than a few times, if you were paying attention. 2 times come to mind immediately. One is when Smasher shows up, and Delamane immediately looks at that and says, okay, and deals with it appropriately, which is to immediately armor up and weapon up, and then get the hell out of Dodge, because it knows that Smasher's going to absolutely destroy it. Full-body conversions are no jokes, and Smasher's no exception to that. The other thing is later, after we've died, skipping ahead a little bit, there's this bit where Delamane decides to go ahead and come out outside of his service range just to get us. And he does. And we ended up helping him, and he's just cool. I like Delamane. I ended up merging, by the way. Great quest chain. Other than the portal reference. Little dated. It was still good. Good quest chain. We go back to Dex. Now I want to talk about Dex briefly, because Dex is interesting. I called his betrayal a ways in advance. And I was asked why. And I like to show my work when I can. So here's my justification for why I thought Dex was going to betray us. He's a fixer who treats us better. He basically tries to butter us up. Okay. Bad sign. And he's only recently come back into town after having been gone from town for a fairly extended period of time. Very bad sign. Now, allow me to explain why. Because there's two types of fixers in this setting. One's like Regina, or Rogue even, who gets a job and then takes care of their people so they can get a job and take care of the people. Trust and reputation are everything. Then there's the other type of fixer. That's the that's the shredder. The chipper shredder is what that is. Get a new person, get a job, burn them, take all the money. Get a new person, give them a job, burn them, take all the money. Now, if you're paying attention, and if you know this setting, you know that rep is basically everything. At every level, even the corpos live on rep. So Buru was able to cow down an entire board of the most powerful people on the planet by simply standing there and looking down at them and insulting them. That's rep right there. So it's top to bottom. So that'll damage your rep, and you're absolutely right. So there's two things that can help you keep going. Luck, of course, so three things. You can have a supply of people who are trying to make a name for himself who don't know better. You know, basically preying on the noobs, effectively. Or you take a 2-year sabbatical. So Dex, well, he's a short-term thinker, and, well, he's an idiot, basically. He betrays us, stupid move, and then he panics. And then he sells us out. And in direct consequence of this, he dies. Okay, I'm with it. But I bring this up because two characters in very short succession have very bad things happen to them, and they are put directly into the crosshairs of the upper echelons of Arasaka, aka the Death Corps, or Wayland Yutani. Pfft. Now, the way Dex reacts to that is to freak out, panic, and basically act like a child. That is to say, childish. So he dies. You know what happens to us, the other one who that happens to? Well, we go back to Victor and we are told that we're dying. And we act like a child too, but in our case it's childlike. We actually regress a little bit. Vic, we're gonna... You're gonna fix this. Right? This is a thing you can fix. You're taking people a ride here. Vic, please, you gotta... And Vic's just lost for words. Great scene, by the way. Great scene. It's interesting to show the contrast, because it says a lot of the mettle of the people in question. Dex was a nobody. V shows that they are much stronger of a person internally, simply by virtue of how they react to the whole thing. You might say that whimpering and crying is like, oh my gosh, but no, that's a very natural and human reaction. V doesn't lose it. V doesn't panic. V doesn't do anything stupid. So, then Misty offers us the pills as the way out, which, funnily enough, turns into a hell of a plot point. And then we go to Jackie's funeral, and oh my god. Now, I'm not going to go through the whole game. We're going to be here hours if I do that. So I'm going to fast forward a little bit. I did a lot of side stuff. Something I've never talked about in Ruminations is the classifications of quests when it comes to RPGs. Now, I originally called these book, main, side, task. However, people weren't really clear on those, and understandably so, because all these terms come from a game called Lotro, Lord of the Rings Online. However, it's worth noting that a huge number of RPGs follow this 4-quest structure. It's a good structure. What this is there's the main plot stuff. What we're gonna, and I'm gonna try to force this into my terminology. I'm gonna call these mandatory mains, or main mandatory. So mandatory main quest stuff. That's the stuff you have to do to beat the game. Book quests, main story quests, whatever you want to call plot quests, right? Huge amount of RPGs have this thing. Then there's optional main stuff. This is usually, in my experience, where a lot of the meat of an RPG sits. Really doing the big, awesome stuff. Final Fantasy VI has this, for example, and all the World of Ruin things. Oblivion with the Fighters Guild, or any guild quest chain with regards to the Elder Scrolls series or the Fallouts. In this game, obviously, we have the story arcs, the major arcs for like Judy or Evelyn leading into Judy or Panam or whatever, right? Then you have side stuff. The side stuff still has story. There's still some relevance to it, but it's lower tier. It's usually just a single quest, and it's just there to give you a little bit of story, a little bit of benefit. There's a lot of those in this one. And that leads us down to tasks. In this game, the tasks are the blue things, the open world stuff where you just go and you take out some people and grab a thing or whatever, right? That's that thing. All 4 of these are present here. And frankly, all 4 of them are pretty well designed, story-wise, and are interesting enough to, again, I never got bored with gameplay-wise, so that's good stuff. I recommend that you take the game at your own pace if you're still listening and somehow haven't actually played this game. I probably should have mentioned this earlier, but I wanted to mention it here because story-wise is really where these distinctions matter more. All of the top 3 categories had some decent and meaty story to them, and that's impressive. Going and repairing a random roller coaster for these voodoo guys, and then going on it with Johnny, that was a nice moment. That was a good little thing. That's a side quest. The 3rd tier. The main mandatory stuff is obviously some really great stuff, but even the optional mandatory, see, I'm screwing up my own terminology. The optional main stuff was still very good content. I loved going through the Judy quests. And of course, many of these can branch substantially. But I suppose you want me to talk about some other stuff. So let's scooch forward. I could talk about characters. I've got some character notes. Judy's wholesome and amazing, and honestly would be more happy being a nomad than being here. Evelyn deserved better. We could talk about suicide. I'm not going to. We paused to talk about suicide for like 40 minutes when we came across her body in the stream. I'm not going to try and summarize that. We went in depth into that one. There was the bit with the gentleman's Pepe's wife, who actually was so chromed out that she was different, that's why her child looked different, and he was worried she was cheating on him, and no, she just was from a different past and didn't want to share it with him. There's one of my favorite side quests in the whole game is right at the beginning. There's these 2 cops trying to get in. Barry, I think, was the name of the guy. And this is one of the earliest side quests I did in the game, too, which says something because it still has an impact on me, 90 hours later. They're trying to get in there. And we can get in with a couple successful checks. And we sit down and talk to him. And he starts talking about how he's lost someone and he's still trying to deal with it. And he's seen some horrible stuff because Night City, horrible setting. I decided to go check out the thing. Turns out it's a turtle. This guy was so far gone that he was talking to a turtle. Now, so far up to this is mostly the kind of quest I would see in a BioWare game or in a Bethesda game. In a good way, it's worth noting. But what really clinched it for me is I go back to the 2 cops, and there's a guy and a girl, and the guy has been this whole, he needs to suck it up and live with it. And the girl has been, I don't know, I'm kind of worried about him. I reveal the presence and existence of the turtle to them, and the guy's like, oh my god, I didn't realize it was that bad. I need to talk to him immediately. And goes to the door. I'm actually tearing up just a little bit, because this was so wholesome. He goes to the door and he says, dude, I've been there. I know exactly what you mean. There was this kid and he was killed and there's this. And he starts opening himself up and the guy opens the door. You know what I really like about this game is that in a horrific, disgusting cesspool of a setting like this, we somehow make things better just across the board. We help so many people. And there's so many moments of awesome like that. Little moments like that. And one of the comments I made to a friend of mine about this game was there was a point at which we stopped doing side stuff and we started focusing on the optional main stuff. And we went for like 5 hours without combat. And believe it or not, that's praise. Because that 5 hours was pure gold. And, like I said earlier, when this game shines, it shines. Oh, it shines. I can't gush about it enough. I can't. So many great stuff. Let's talk about, I mentioned Judy. Panam, she didn't actually gel with me as much as I thought, but she's really human. That's the thing I liked about Panam. There is something very human about her. She's probably the kind of person that I would get along with in real life. And other people would ask how I put up with her, and I'd be like, you don't understand her. It's okay. But she yells and she's angry all the time, and she's so impulsive. Yeah, that's just kind of how she is. She's not really all that angry, and she's not really all that bad. She cares. She just doesn't really know how to express it properly. Oh. You know, I can talk about Judy. I already mentioned her, actually. Judy, who is so fragile, and oh my gosh, poor Judy. I'm so glad she gets out of here and gets on with a better life. She's getting evacuated to the extant as well. River, who we did not romance, was actually pretty cool too. His quests were a little bit cut short, but I really liked his arc, and I almost didn't because it was almost too much. Going through the Peter Pan thing was disgusting. And I want to stress that I am not being hyperbolic here. I legitimately and literally felt nauseous, physically nauseous going through parts of that quest. At the end of the quest, we stop the guy was already stopped, but we save a lot of the people. We successfully hunt down the farm. We successfully shut down the billion traps outside. We get in there. We get them out. We save them. And then we have this wonderfully wholesome thing where they immediately follow this horrific quest with us playing AR laser tag with the kids at the trailer park. And that's good. Not just because of both quests were very well designed, very well crafted, very brilliantly done, but because if you're going to absolutely slam someone in the gut like that, then there's only two things you can do narratively. You can slam them again, or you can be like, all right, here's some flowers. And that's what this game did, and I think that's good pacing, even from a purely narrative perspective. I let the kids win, by the way. God, it's worth noting I did that quest chain the day after Christmas, which is the day after I'd seen my own niece, which is probably part of why it literally made me nauseous to go through it. River's awesome. I actually felt bad not romancing him. Shrug. I should mention something, though, while we're talking about romance. I think the romance is handled pretty badly in this game, if I might be so bold. What happens is you've got a character, and then you develop them, and you do their arc, and they're cool, and they're awesome, and they connect to you, and there's some great stuff. And then, like, in the last 5 minutes of their arc, of their entire quest chain, they're like, I love you, V. And it comes out of nowhere in almost every case. It feels a little bit tacked on, with the exception of Judy. Judy was clearly crushing on us from word go. And, okay, sure. What's interesting about that, though, is if you decide not to romance Judy, the way the scene is written is it fits neatly to be non-romantic as it does romantic. So I will give them credit there. She leans in close and she says, I need, and you can kiss her. Or you can give her a hug. And I gave her a hug. And it's flowed smoothly. Oh, thank you so much. And it was just such a, again, I keep using this word. It was such a heartwarming moment. We had her. It's okay. It's okay, Judy. I'm right here. I got you. And nothing about that felt awkward. There was no, oh, that's not what I meant. Or there was no, I secretly wanted this. No, it was as if that was what she was always saying. I think Judy in general is probably the best designed secondary character in the game. Although I would be remiss if I did not mention someone else. And that is Johnny. So Johnny, it's breathtaking. Johnny, non-lethal. Memes. The physics and non-lethal war memes. I installed a mod early on that was a non-lethal mod. That's why I kept track of all the people I was killing. Did I already say that? God, I've been talking for a while. I don't know how long this one's going to be. I never have an intended deadline for these. I just talk until I'm out of things to talk about. Long game. I've heard some people say they don't like Keanu Reeves' performance, and preference is preference, but I think he does a very good job of it. In fact, I think this is probably one of the better acting jobs I've ever seen Keanu Reeves do. I know, low bar. But I mean that. He does a good job of portraying someone who is just kind of sick of things and has already been ground under the wheel, and he's angry about it, and he's frustrated about it, and there's just so little he can do about it, so he just kind of puts up with it. I mean, what's the point? And he's kind of vile and kind of a dick, but mostly it's just because he doesn't know how to properly process any of it because there's nothing he can do about it. I detonated a nuke in the middle of town, and 50 years later, nothing's better. WTF. How many of you played Dragon Age 2? The character I want to parallel him most to is the Era Shock. Now, you don't have to do this, but I want you to picture something that really just is despicable to you. No, not a joke, not a meme, not like pineapple on pizza. No, I mean something that's really vile. Something that actually bothers you. Something that makes you just angry or upset or nauseous on a way that other things don't. Something actually bad, okay? Now I want you to imagine that you're surrounded by that. Now I want you to imagine that there's nothing you can do about it. And you see the mentality there. Both the Era Shock and Johnny were just sitting there, waiting and watching and seeing it just get worse and worse. And funnily enough, both of them had the same reaction. They snapped. No, not that snap. And there goes half of reality. They couldn't take it anymore. Johnny nuked and Era Shock attacked, right? The Era Shock, because it's not his name. It's an interesting contrast between the two. And it really shows in how Johnny reacts to most things. Johnny's story arc over the course of the game is phenomenal. I only got 60% sync with him. But by the end, it felt like he had become a much better person overall. Seeing him mentor the kid, giving him the guitar, walking away from it all, putting away the gun, putting away the necklace in the grave. Just really, really good stuff. And it was satisfying to watch him be given the thing that so few people are in real life. A second chance. And the best part is he knows that and he values that and he wants to do something about that. What's even funnier is that ending is arguably something of a bad ending. Not because it's badly done or whatever, but because, well, if you think about the consequences of everything we do, Saburu's gone. Yorinobu got away with his plot to cause chaos from within, which lines up with what was going on back in 2020, by the way. You know, what happens when the bomb doesn't work? You become the bomb. And so that means Arasaka's gone and a fifth corporate war is happening. And the fourth corporate war caused a lot of damage, so... Also, we've unleashed a mega death AI that was built off of the engrams of a genius netrunner who has now merged many other AIs, including V, into her. Frankly, Alt 2 is the most terrifying thing in the whole game. I mean that sincerely. They do a really good job of making her as horrifying as she should be. Oh my gosh. But I suppose I have a question for you, as I often do. Why do you think Johnny changes? Do you think it's because of what he experiences with us? Because he's along for the ride, and people will change just based on experience, right? And as I said, we help a lot of people. We see a lot of good people. And we reach out to a lot of people. We're also a friend. We actually become Johnny's friend, a real friend, not just someone who puts up with him or tolerates him. And frankly, several other people kind of do slide into that role throughout this game as well. The most notable ones being Carrie and Rogue. I didn't really talk about Carrie. He worked for me a lot better than I thought he would. At first, I thought he was just going to be some stuck-up, rocker boy or whatever. But no, he was legit. And even the thing where he's storming the gig with the Us Check? I can't remember what they're called. The Japanese singers. He's like, oh yeah, well, no, let's actually he's a rocker boy, but he's his own thing, and he's nowhere near as impulsive or, frankly, as childish as, Johnny was. But why do you think he changed? Why do you think Johnny changes? Because he does get to experience a lot, right? Well, here's option 2. He and V are basically merging. He, in fact, says this flat out during one of the endings, that there is no real V and Johnny anymore. There's just the merger, and the two have become more like each other throughout the course of the game. Interestingly enough, based on how the game is designed, you can kind of decide that for yourself, so I leave that as a question mark. It is worth noting that these two choices are not mutually exclusive. It could easily be both. What I find most interesting, though, about Johnny is how he contrasts Takamura, who was a total bro, by the way. I loved Takamura, and saving his life during the parade mission was like the best choice, because he was awesome every time he showed up after that. Especially in the deal ending where we go and work with Arasaka, which, by the way, was beautifully horrific. incredible presentation of hell. I don't mean that word dismissively. I don't use it in a casual manner. What they describe is basically what they showcase is what I would describe as hell. And the whole time, the music and the visuals, the discoloration, all of it is just showcasing this hell that we have fallen into. And we lose it. And who shows up to take care of us? Takamura. And he offers us the deal. We die. Oh, wait. I suppose we should talk about that, shouldn't we? Now, I'm going to go and be 100% honest with you. I didn't think there was anything to talk about on this point. And then several people in chat, when I brought this up casually, were like, no, you're wrong. And that was really surprising to me. I don't mean this in a dismissive way or an arrogant way, but if someone hands me an apple, and I say I have an apple, and someone says, no, you don't, I'm confused by that. So to me, this is just binary 1-to-1. But we actually discussed this for a long time, like 40 minutes. We discussed this on stream. And I realized that we were running into definitions. So many arguments are boiled down to people having different definitions. So what I was proposing is true, and I still hold this to be true, is if you have your digital consciousness copied and you are killed, then you are killed. You're dead. You're gone. Done. The copy gets to go on, but this is you 2. So that's Johnny 2, Saburo 2, V2. Make sense? Now, that's my take on it. The other take was that, well, because this new you has all your consciousness and all your memories and whatnot, and the previous host has been destroyed, then the new host is still you. Now, I'm not going to lay judgment here. And again, we discussed this back and forth for a while. And honestly, it doesn't matter that much per se. It's just interesting to posit, especially in a setting like this one where we do not know if it is possible for there to be such a thing as an anchor point. This is one of the things I brought up and we discussed at length. Anchor points are identifiers. There's a proper terminology here, and I don't know it. We had one person in chat who knew about metadata and could tell in more depth about how this works in programming. So forgive me for this incredibly amateurish explanation. But I'll use World of Warcraft as an example because it's a game I know very, very well. There are 18, maybe-ish, different individual objects. All of them have the same name, same appearance, same stats. How does the game distinguish between these? Well, there's a marker. I call this the anchor. Each of these anchors is different. And that anchor says X537, this anchor says X538, this anchor says X539, etc. So even though all the stats and information and data of these things are identical, the anchors help the system to distinguish them from each other, right? In other words, that and that are different entities, totally different and separate. You already see where I'm going with this. So in some settings, let's leave programming for a second. In some settings, individuality, what you identify as the self or the original self, has an anchor. The most common word for this is the word soul. Many settings have a soul within them. And within the realm of fiction, we can debate this because we can define such things within the realm of fiction because that's how that works, right? So we can, to use Warcraft as an example again, there are souls in Warcraft. If someone in Warcraft had a copy of themselves made, a digital copy, and then you killed the original soul is gone and dead and going on to the afterlife. The new entity is a completely new entity, new soul. There's no debate here, right? But in Cyberpunk, well, that's an interesting question. Who knows? Now, one of the strong counter-arguments that was made to this, other than just, the USB test that I showed on camera, was that Alt herself, the person who invented the Soul Killer program, flat out says it's a new entity. And Alt 2, excuse me, I should be more clear. Alt 2 flat out states that she is not Alt Cunningham anymore, that she is a new entity that only has based off of the original. And Lord knows some years beyond the Blackwall probably didn't help that, but you get the point. So looking at this whole thing, it is debatable as to whether or not Johnny is Johnny 2 or Johnny 1, and whether V is V2 or V1 or whatever. I don't even remember why I brought this up at this point. So forgive me. Oh, right, I was talking about Johnny. and V and the deal ending, and this is another possibility as to why Johnny might have changed, is because it's entirely possible that the merger happened, and thus the V that gets uploaded at the end of the deal ending might literally be a V Johnny, even though they've taken parts of him out. There's possibilities here. And as ever, I am curious of your guys' thoughts, if you don't mind sharing. And please don't mention Soma. Everyone brings up Soma when this comes up. I get it. I know. I'm with it. We'll be doing a review of it sometime at some distant future, whenever it's funded. A couple other thoughts before we move forward and conclude this. I mentioned Takamoto. He is such a bro. He's awesome. He's respectful. He's witty. But the most interesting thing about Takamoto, other than the fact that he's a fully fleshed out, interesting character, is the fact that he comes from a poor and disheveled background as well. Now, he got lucky. He got the eye of someone rich and powerful. Sound familiar? As a consequence of that, there's actually a lot of parallels between him and Johnny. It's just Johnny didn't get the eye of someone rich and powerful. So Johnny went on to be a rocker boy, and Takamura went on to be what is effectively a solo. Perelis, that of all of the stuff in this game, that was probably the most horrifying thing. Who do you think was behind the rewriting of the personalities of the Perelis family? For those of you not aware, there's a optional main quest where you go through and talk to the the person who is running for mayor. And you find out that the previous mayor was assassinated by his deputy. And then you find out that there's some weird things. And, oh, by the way, his mind is being actively rewritten. And so are his memories by someone. And it's already been happening to both him and his wife. Now, there's a few tidbits throughout that quest. But the thing that struck me most is that they're actively working with the Maelstrom group. You know, the AI robotics worshipping psychos. That's the biggest thing that made me think it was an AI. I think this is some kind of rogue AI situation, that there is something has leaked out of the black wall and is doing this in order to reprogram these people and put them into power. Now, here's the really funny and horrific part. Do you think they're doing it for evil intent, good intent, or neither? My personal favorite moment in that entire quest chain is after the quest chain was over. The gentleman, Jeff, texts me. And so the text pops up, hey, oh my gosh, it's horrible. I need to get things checked out. And you could respond. It doesn't matter what you respond with, but I responded with, are you going to be okay? You need to take care of yourself. And then there's this pause, and then it said, user ID not found. The endings were very well done. I don't actually have much to say about these, really. The suicide ending was beautifully done. Beautifully presented, very, very tragic and very, very heartrending. Oh, poor Judy. The deal ending, I kind of already mentioned. There's this bit where, they talk about your code. You have to have your code. I call that a core. Something that I'll be discussing in videos that I already recorded months ago that'll be coming live next year with regards to how a person has a core. And that's what makes you keep going. That's what really matters to you. And that's what Johnny talks about here, is how that's an aspect of him. And then we've got the ending with Rogue. We charge in. We play as Johnny, which is actually interesting. We play as Johnny even when we're in the digital realm. And we decide V and Johnny's final fates there, which is nice. And then the Pan Am ending, obviously. Like I don't want to go over specifics again. That's what the stream's for. Great endings. But the biggest thing I wanted to talk about with the endings is how they're distinct from each other, and how they feel distinct, and how they feel like an actual culmination of your choices throughout the game. Even despite all the bugs and issues and rushed and problematic development and money people maybe, and development maybe, and management definitely. Despite all of that, they still managed to make 3 distinct awesome endings. Mass Effect 3 reference. I walked away from this game a little bit weary, admittedly, because, oh my god, these rocks in my shoes were bugging the crap out of me by the end. And it got to the point where I had to hold on to my temper just a little bit by the end of the game. I never got bored of the game, but I got frustrated with it constantly. But I'm glad I stuck with it, because when this game shines, it shines. I hope you've enjoyed my thoughts here. I'm looking forward to reading yours. I'll see you next time, guys.